My name's Daniel. I'm 38 years old, live in Charlottesville, Virginia, and if I'm being honest with you, I used to think I was one of the lucky ones. Good job in software engineering, decent apartment downtown, and until recently, I was engaged to someone who made me feel like life was finally settling into place. We had a plan, you know, a real future. A farmhouse wedding in Albemarle County, a honeymoon road trip up the Pacific coast, and maybe if things lined up just right, a couple of kids and a slow, quiet life. My parents even offered to help. They didn't just offer, they insisted. Said they had this wedding fund set aside since I was a teenager. I never asked how much. I didn't care. I was just grateful. Turns out, it was a lot more than I expected, 230 grand. I found that out the same day I found out it was gone. Vanished. Every last dollar. No, it wasn't a hacker. It wasn't a mistake. It was worse than that. It was family. And the story? It starts with a lie so big, I still can't believe they looked me in the eye while telling it. It happened on a Tuesday, one of those unremarkable spring afternoons when everything feels a little too quiet. I was heading out of work when my mom called, her voice frantic, trembling. She said my dad had collapsed. Something about chest pain, shortness of breath, the whole 9 yards. She said the ambulance was on the way, and I needed to get to the hospital immediately. No time for questions. So I dropped everything and drove like a madman to the ER. By the time I got there, my dad was sitting up in a hospital bed looking annoyed, not in pain. He said it was indigestion. The doctors ran a bunch of tests and found nothing. No heart issue. No blackie. Nothing. That night, as we sat in the hospital room, my mom got all teary-eyed and said it was a wake-up call. That they'd realized how unprepared they were for emergencies, financially speaking. That they had to dip into my wedding fund to cover some immediate costs, tests, insurance gaps, whatever. I just nodded. Of course. What was I going to say? It was my dad. I was scared. If a few grand got used to keep him breathing, fine. Worth it. But something didn't sit right. The next day, I checked their insurance portal. No major out-of-pocket charges. I checked with the hospital billing department. They hadn't even finalized a bill yet. And the kicker? My wedding fund account didn't just have a small withdrawal. It had been emptied. All of it. Gone. I didn't say anything at first. I needed to be sure. That night, I sat on my couch, laptop open, every browser tab a financial record or login page. I tracked every transfer from that account. And there it was, a single wire transaction. The entire $230,000 moved to another checking account in my parents' name. Not split. Not staggered. One clean, deliberate move 2 days before the hospital incident. I stared at the screen like it might blink and correct itself. Maybe they were just holding it for some reason. Maybe something had spooked them. Maybe, God, I don't know. I wanted to believe anything but the truth. I didn't confront them right away. Instead, I went to the bank. I asked a teller I'd known for years if they could show me which branch processed the transaction. Small talk turned awkward when she realized I wasn't smiling. She printed the information. A branch up in Fredericksburg. I hadn't been to Fredericksburg in years. But you know who had? My brother, the golden boy. My younger brother David had always been the family prize. Charming, good-looking, the kind of guy who never held a job longer than 6 months, but somehow always had the latest phone, the newest watch, and a social media feed that looked like a travel agency ad. I'd long ago accepted that my parents coddled him, that they bailed him out of every mess he created. But I never thought they'd do something like this. Just to be sure, I pulled credit reports, background checks, all legal, all clean. But then I found it, a wedding registry. David had gotten married in Fiji with a 5-star, 12-day, all expenses paid honeymoon booked under both his and his new wife's name. I nearly dropped my phone. He hadn't told me, hadn't invited me. My own brother. I scrolled through the photos. Instagram perfect shots of champagne on beaches, yacht dinners, underwater diving. And there, in the corner of one pic, was my mother, smiling wide in a floral print dress. Suddenly, the medical emergency made sense. They needed me out of the way. They needed a story to explain the missing money. They needed me emotionally disarmed so I wouldn't question it. They played me. All of them. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat at the kitchen table, staring at the wood grain like it might offer an answer. My fiancée, God bless her, came home around midnight from her shift and found me sitting there, empty coffee mug in hand, looking like I'd aged 10 years in a day. I told her everything. And to her credit, she didn't say, "I told you so," because she had warned me about the way my parents seemed to orbit David like he was the sun, about how they always managed to make everything about him, even our engagement party. She just sat next to me, rested her head on my shoulder, and said she had an idea. A good one. One that would change everything. The plan wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. That's what made it perfect. We didn't elope exactly, at least not in the Vegas, Elvis impersonator kind of way. We got married quietly, on a misty Saturday morning at a civil courthouse in Staunton, just the two of us and a friend from her side who happened to be a notary. No announcement, no invitations, no white dress or tux, just peace. And the best part? My parents didn't know. Neither did David. Let them keep planning for the big family wedding. That would never happen. Let them think we were still waiting to finalize the venue or pick a caterer. While they pictured their fantasy celebration, where they no doubt expected to sit front and center and soak up credit for funding everything, I was done playing along. But my wife, brilliant as she is, wanted more than silence. She wanted closure. She wanted proof. So we baited them. She called my mother a few days later and said she was worried that I'd been acting distant, that I'd started asking weird questions about the wedding fund, that I was considering canceling the wedding entirely, that maybe we should just use what's left of the money for something simpler or postpone it altogether. She said my behavior was unstable. She made it sound like I was unraveling. Within 6 hours, my mother drove 3 hours from her house, 2 hours, and showed up with a bag of muffins like she wasn't carrying a loaded conscience in her purse. I left the apartment under the pretense of a last-minute meeting, gave my wife space to work. She invited my mother in, offered her coffee, and did what she does best, let people talk. It didn't take long. My mother was nervous, rambling, fidgety, over-explaining. She said the money wasn't stolen, exactly, that it had been reallocated, that they did what they had to do for David because he was in a tough spot emotionally, and they didn't want him to feel left behind. And then she said the golden words. My wife had her repeat it. We used Daniel's fund for David's honeymoon. I know it was wrong, but what else were we supposed to do? My wife, bless her calm and calculated heart, asked if she could write that down, just so she could explain it better to Daniel later. My mother agreed. She signed it, notarized, dated, initialed. I got home an hour later. My mom was gone. My wife handed me the piece of paper like it was a winning lottery ticket. And honestly, it was. I waited 3 days before making a move. Not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted to feel nothing when I did it. I didn't want anger in my voice or bitterness in my hands. I wanted to be cold, precise, surgical. That Friday, I met with a lawyer downtown. Not just any lawyer, my wife's cousin actually, a stone-faced woman named Meredith who once sued a Fortune 500 company and made them blink. She read the confession note like it was a piece of art. Asked one question. Are they liquid? Translation. Do they have assets? I laughed. Oh, they had assets. House in the suburbs. Paid off. 2 retirement accounts. A cabin they never told me about. Listed under my dad's LLC. They had money. My money. The suit was filed within the week. Fraud. Misappropriation of funds. Civil theft. The confession gave us a clean line straight through the fog. Meredith called it a rare gift. The kind of thing judges don't just read, they underline. My parents got served on a Tuesday morning. I know this because my mother left me a voicemail that started with a gasp and ended in a sob. She begged me to talk. She said they didn't think it would go this far. She said it wasn't theft, it was family business. As if that somehow made it better. David didn't call. He texted, said I was overreacting, said I was ruining the family, said I was acting like a stranger. I didn't respond. I let the lawsuit do the talking. It moved fast. My parents tried to delay it. They even offered to pay some of it back, as if the money was a misunderstanding and not a betrayal layered with lies. Meredith didn't blink. She pushed. Then came discovery. And here's where the twist hit me. The wedding fund wasn't the only account they touched. There was another, one I'd never even thought to check. My college fund. What was left of it had also been drained years ago to help David through a rough patch. A patch that apparently involved a failed crypto startup and a month-long stay in Tulum. The judge didn't take kindly to any of it. In court, my mother cried. My father tried to look proud, but his hands trembled when he spoke. David didn't even show up. They lost the case in under 20 minutes. The judgment was brutal. Full repayment with interest, attorney's fees, and the court's added opinion that their actions were intentionally exploitative. The house? Sold. The cabin? Liquidated. The retirement funds? Frozen and garnished. I didn't see it coming, but I walked out of that courtroom not just with justice, but with everything. And I still hadn't told anyone we were already married. We didn't rush it. After the lawsuit, we let everything settle. The dust, the noise, the grief, if you can even call it that. What I felt wasn't sadness. It was something cleaner, emptier, like silence after a long, Cruel song. It took months for the court to process the liquidation. Another 2 before the check cleared. It arrived in a plain envelope, just numbers typed on white paper, a total sum that made me sit down at the kitchen table and stare at it for a long time. The money was back. My money. With interest. But we didn't touch it. Not yet. We were in a little place out in Crozet for the summer, just to breathe. A cottage with wraparound porches, wild mint in the yard, and a clawfoot tub deep enough to get lost in. My wife and I spent most days barefoot, cooking too much pasta, talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes we didn't talk at all, just existed next to each other, quietly healing. Then in late September, she looked up from her cup of coffee and asked if I still wanted a farmhouse wedding. I didn't even have to answer. We planned it in secret, not because we were hiding, but because this time we weren't inviting anyone who'd ever made us feel small. No cousins, no coworkers we barely knew, no pity RSVPs. Just people who loved us in the quiet, ordinary way that lasts. We found an old apple orchard turn event space out in Scottsville. Weathered wood, soft grass, fireflies after dark. The owner let us rent it for a full weekend. Said he liked how we looked at each other. Said love like that didn't need much decorating. We wrote our vows by candlelight. She wore her grandmother's lace dress, stitched by hand and aged just enough to feel like magic. I wore a navy suit I already owned and a smile I didn't have to fake. We got married again, this time for real. We danced barefoot under string lights, drank cider straight from the barrel, laughed until our ribs ached. And not once, not for a single moment, did I miss them. No empty chairs for people who chose to disappear. No tension lurking beneath polite, small talk. No one whispering behind wine glasses about family drama. Just joy, just peace. It took them exactly 13 days after the court judgment to reach out again. My mom sent a long email with the subject line, "Can we talk?" The message started with a quote about forgiveness and ended with a plea for a second chance. She said they made a mistake, that they'd learned their lesson, that families go through things. She even mentioned the wedding, said they'd understand if we didn't want them there, but they still hoped to be part of our lives moving forward. I didn't reply. 2 days later, a letter showed up in our mailbox. Handwritten, pages of nostalgia and guilt. Childhood memories weaponized into guilt trips. Mentions of the zoo trips and birthday pancakes. A line about how David is struggling too, you know. That one made my wife laugh. They didn't understand. This wasn't about a single moment or transaction. It wasn't even about the money anymore. It was the betrayal of it all. The years of favoritism, the emotional accounting where David always came up in the black, and I was just the line item marked responsible. They wanted forgiveness without discomfort. Reconciliation without accountability. A story where everything could reset like a family sitcom. Cue the laugh track, roll the credits, hug it out. But real life isn't like that. I never replied to the letter. David tried one more time, sent a video message, looked straight into the camera, fake sincerity oozing from every syllable. Said we used to be close, that he hated what happened, that maybe it got out of hand. He didn't say sorry. He didn't mention the money. He didn't even ask how I was. He just talked about himself. As usual, I watched it once, deleted it. That was the last time any of them reached out. And not because they finally understood, I don't think. More likely, they just realized the well had dried up, that I wasn't a backup plan anymore. I was gone. Not with rage. Not with revenge. Just done. And there's a power in that, you know? In choosing not to answer. In drawing a boundary so solid it doesn't need to be spoken aloud. We didn't block them. We didn't make some grand declaration. We just stopped. No new phone numbers. No dramatic Facebook posts. Just silence. And that, more than anything, drove them crazy. It sat in our joint savings account for months. Untouched. Like a trophy we didn't ask for, but couldn't ignore. People assume that getting your money back is the end of the story. That once the wrong is reversed, life resumes as it was. But it's not like that. Getting justice is a strange thing. It doesn't fill the hole, it just stops the bleeding. You're still left with the scar. We debated what to do with it. That $230,000, plus interest, felt radioactive, like it had absorbed all the betrayal, the courtroom silence, the tear-stained voicemails. I didn't want to use it for anything mundane. Not for bills. Not for travel. It wasn't clean. My wife had an idea. Of course she did. She said if the money came from pain, it should be used to heal. Not just for us, but for others. People who knew what it felt like to be used, abandoned, lied to by the very people who were supposed to protect them. So we created something. Quietly. No social media campaigns. No grandstanding. We used a portion of the money to fund a local therapy scholarship in Charlottesville for people navigating family estrangement, betrayal, and trauma, those who wanted to process their past but couldn't afford to. We called it the Closure Fund. Simple, no names attached, just anonymous help. And the rest? We used to build our real future. Not a glamorous one, but one that was ours. We bought 5 acres on the outskirts of Nelson County. Overgrown, a little wild, exactly what we wanted. No HOA, no neighbors peeking over fences. Just space and peace. We started clearing land together, one Saturday at a time. My wife planted lavender along the property line. I sketched floor plans in a notebook I'd had since college. We made plans not for the life we thought we were supposed to have, but for the one we wanted. Every nail we'd eventually hammer into that home would be paid for by the silence they left us with. And that felt like a fair trade. It happened in late November, just as the trees went bare and the wind stopped pretending to be gentle. We were outside, my wife raking the last stubborn pile of leaves near the lavender, me unloading bags of gravel from the truck for the foundation markers. Then we heard it. 3 sharp knocks at the front door of the cottage. We weren't expecting anyone. It wasn't a delivery. We hadn't ordered anything. No friends were due to visit. Our driveway is long and gravel, and we didn't hear a car pull in. We froze. My wife looked at me, rake in hand, her expression wary but calm. I wiped my hands and walked slowly toward the porch, every step pressing into the gravel like a warning. There she was, my mother, standing at the door like she belonged there, wearing that same pale blue coat I'd seen her in during my high school graduation. Hair windblown, face drawn. No muck-up, no softness, just nerves. I didn't speak. I didn't open the door. She didn't knock again. Just waited, like maybe I'd forget everything and pretend it was still 1999 and she just brought home groceries. She looked around at the porch, saw the potted rosemary, the boots lined up neatly, the wind chimes that only rang when we wanted them to. Finally, she said something. I couldn't hear it. The door was thick. My wife had followed me up the steps by then, her presence behind me steady and grounding. I didn't move. My mother took a breath, nodded once, and reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out an envelope, white, sealed, and slid it into the mailbox. Then she turned around and walked back down the drive. On foot. She hadn't driven up. She'd parked at the end of the road and walked all the way. Like she knew she wouldn't be invited in. We stood there in silence for a long time. Gravel still crunching in the distance. I didn't go for the envelope right away. When I finally did, I didn't open it. Not yet. We went inside, washed our hands, made tea, sat at the kitchen table with the envelope between us like it might explode. Inside was a short letter. No apology, just an update. She and my father were living in a small apartment now, 2 towns over. She mentioned a church group. Said they missed us. Said she hoped we were well. Taped to the letter was a photo. One I hadn't seen before. Me and David, ages 7 and 5, in Halloween costumes. Me as a firefighter. Him as a dragon. We were laughing. I stared at it for a long time. Then I put it in a drawer and closed it. That picture stayed in the drawer for months. I never brought it up, not even to my wife. She never asked. We both understood something unspoken. Some things you don't process with words. You just live through them, let them settle, and carry the weight they leave behind like a scar you stop noticing. But I thought about it sometimes about those kids in the photo. That moment, that laugh. There was a time I would have done anything for my brother. I mean anything. When we were little, I'd take the blame for things he broke. As teens, I covered for him when he snuck out at night. And in our 20s, when he flamed out of college for the 3rd time, I sent him money without a second thought, because that's what family was, right? That was before I realized family isn't a shield, it's a mirror. It shows you who you are when no one's watching, and who they are when they think you'll never leave. I didn't respond to the letter, not out of spite, out of clarity. You can't rebuild something that was never solid in the first place. You can't return to a version of the past that never really existed. And you can't heal if you keep reopening the wound. People like to talk about cutting someone off like it's an act of rage. But for me, it wasn't rage. It was relief. Not a slam of the door, but a quiet closing of it. A lock turned. A deep breath. It wasn't about holding on to pain. It was about no longer carrying someone else's. We never sent anything back. Not the letter. Not the photo. We didn't answer the emails that came 2 months later around the holidays. We didn't respond to David's name tag card that said, "Hope you're still not mad." We weren't mad. We were free. There's a difference between distance and freedom. Distance is passive. It's avoidance. But freedom? Freedom is intentional. It's when you finally stop begging people to treat you like you matter. That Christmas, my wife and I drove up to the Blue Ridge Parkway, stayed in a rental cabin with a fireplace and a view that made you forget everything that ever hurt. We brought no gifts, no phones, no obligations. Just each other. We hiked in the frost, drank hot cider, and talked about the next step for our land, the house, the garden, maybe even goats someday. And at night, we watched the fire die down in silence, her head on my chest, my hand resting where I could feel her heartbeat. No noise, no guilt, no pretending, just peace. We finished building the house almost a year to the day after the lawsuit ended. It's not big. 2 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, exposed beams, wide windows that drink in the light, a porch that creaks just enough to feel like home. We hung our wedding photo above the fireplace, not the courthouse one, the orchard wedding. Her in that lace dress, me in my navy suit, both of us barefoot in the grass. Every time I walk past it, I feel rooted, like we grew something beautiful out of scorched earth. And we did. The goats came in spring. 2 of them, Beatrice and Marvin. Ridiculous, stubborn, joyful creatures that chew on everything and follow my wife around like she's some kind of lavender-scented shepherd. We grow things now. Tomatoes, zucchini, wildflowers we don't bother naming. Life feels quieter but fuller. Sometimes I still think about my parents. Not often, just in moments. When I hear a certain hymn my mother used to hum while folding laundry. When I see an old man in a grocery store who walks like my dad. Those memories don't hurt like they used to. They're just there, like dust on an unused shelf. Present, but not sharp. David? I haven't seen him in years. Last I heard, he and his wife split up. Something about money trouble. He tried to reach out once, some vague apology wrapped in excuses. I didn't reply, because I don't owe him closure. Not after everything. The thing no one tells you about betrayal is how lonely the healing is. How no one claps when you set boundaries. How peace doesn't arrive like a parade. It shows up like a whisper. Subtle, slow, earned. But one day, you wake up and realize you haven't thought about them in weeks. That your chest isn't tight. That the silence you used to fear has become your sanctuary. And that's the gift. Not the money. Not the victory. Not even the farmhouse. Just this quiet life. This soft ending. This truth. They took everything they could. And I'm still here. Whole.